I'm Mike Kelzer. Growing up in my family's pharmacy, the moments that stuck were the business conversations with my dad. This podcast continues those conversations. No scripts, no fluff, just honest insights into the business of pharmacy. I'll be here each week. I hope you'll join me. Paul, introduce yourself to our listeners.
My name is Paul Romness, CEO, founder, and chairman of OS Therapies, which is a biotech company.
All right, Paul, when I looked at your stuff, I don't think I've had a company like you on before. I think your thing is a research company. If I do talk to anybody that's willing to talk to me in the pharmacy manufacturing industry, it's a whole manufacturer, I suppose. So what does that mean, a research company versus a drug manufacturer? And is it common? This episode is sponsored by Day Lee of Buchanan, Ingersoll & Rooney, pharmacist, attorney, and PBM fighter. Hear more in the April 7th episode and click the link in today's show notes to get in touch.
Well, it's what we are before we become a pharmaceutical or biotech company with commercial products, right? So it's doing the clinical research. And if it's clinical, it means we're in the clinic and we're doing trials in humans. You'll also hear preclinical biotechs or pharma companies or medical device, and they're still in the research phase. Maybe some animal health testing or maybe some design, still bench work in the lab. But when you say clinical stage biotech company, we actually have a product that has gone through a clinical trial. In our case, we finished the trial in October, and it's a phase 2B clinical trial in osteosarcoma, which is a very deadly bone cancer, and there aren't any new treatments for osteosarcoma. The treatments that there are out there now are brutal, Mike. Each one could kill an adult human. They're all long in the teeth, over 40 years old, and these kids that get osteosarcoma, it's usually teenagers. They usually get this bone cancer in their long bones, in their legs or in their humerus, their arm bone. And they get 9 months of this chemo. And it's considered the worst chemo regimen in cancer.
My dad passed from bone cancer. And when I heard bone cancer with him, I'm thinking, a guy that starts at 225 and is going to be at 98, but thankfully he, passed of pneumonia or something. He was a good hefty, 200 pounds when he passed away. But boy, that's sad to hear with that stuff. So, Paul, I see. So your company, when it says a research company, it's like research because we're not to the final stage of the product yet. And if we were talking a year from now, I might be seeing OS Therapies. It might be a manufacturer or something like that versus a research. So that's where the research name comes in, because you're not at the final product yet.
We hope to be on the market within a year.
Really?
Which means that there would be a new treatment for osteosarcoma. This will be a biologic, so we're giving the body a biologic infection, happens to be listeria. And listeria is what's known as an ancient biologic infection, happened way back 1 million years ago. And the body has a violent immune response to it. If you get the flu vaccine, you've got about 2 immune responses. When patients receive our therapy, they have 10, 11, 12 immune responses. It's like a 5-alarm fire. And we actually shut down the listeria 4 hours after we give it to the patients with an antibiotic, and it kills the listeria. The immune response that we've kicked it off starts in hour 1. Even though we kill the listeria in hour 4, the immune response keeps trucking. And the immune response tells the body, hey, there's this listeria in our body. We need to secrete some T cells out of the lymph nodes. The body does exactly that, starts secreting these what are called killer T cells, and they go out and find those little micrometastases, what we call cancer seeds. And they're these little Darwinian bastards.
Does your business want to reach our 500 weekly listeners during this 15 seconds? Head on over to bizofpharmpod.com to find out how.
And those killer T cells see them as a foreign object, and they go and they gang up on them and kill them. It's those little micrometastases that are trying to land in your lungs and your brain to then really sit in and get in on the oxygen and soft tissues that's there and build a kind of a beachhead of cancer. And so we're trying to catch those little micrometastases before they land in the lungs of the brain.
So, Paul, how many people in your company, and are you farming out some of this stuff? Are you farming out the research? And how does that work out with a company like yours?
Well, yeah, we are very small, we're very agile, and we're very efficient. So we did go public in August 1st on the New York Stock Exchange, but we've only got 5 or 6 employees. My chief technology officer, I've never physically met. She lives out in Vancouver, off of an island in Vancouver, British Columbia. We use a lot of vendors. Gives us a lot of flexibility, the whole idea of rent versus buying an employee. And with this new, economy, I think it's much more efficient to bring in the best people we can find for the period of time that we need them.
My son-in-law just got a job, and there's a debate of work from home, and these people are being spoiled and all that, but it allows him, who's in Raleigh, North Carolina, it allows a company in San Francisco to hire him. And so they've got their pick of any great people in the world, basically, versus someone who's 30 miles and is willing to live out in California. So, Paul, what kind of things do you use vendors for now? Give me an idea of some of the businesses that are out there that you can hire for that stuff.
Sure. So the nice thing is both of our platform technologies, the OST HER2 that we're using in osteosarcoma, and we have another technology you might call it an ADC. It's called antibody drug conjugate. And the way I describe it is it's a cruise missile that you can target to a certain part of the body, and you have these cluster bombs that we can drop right in the cancer environment, which will debulk big cancers like ovarian cancer, stuff like that. Both our technologies came from very renowned institutions. Our OST HER2 came from the University of Pennsylvania, and our ADC technology worked with Scripps Institute. So those technologies were developed at top-notch places. The founding scientists are on our team, but we use a lot of vendors. We used a vendor to run our clinical trial. We used a co-op, the Children's Oncology Group. We did the clinical trials at 21 of their 200 sites. We use vendors for accounting, obviously legal. We are in conversations with vendors around commercialization of our products, both canine and human. And then we're talking to partners to out-license those technologies and get them to patients, not just in the United States. There are only 1,000 kids a year that get osteosarcoma in the United States. 30 to 40,000 dogs a year get osteosarcoma. It's the number 1 disease killer of dogs, number 2 killer after automobiles. And there are no treatments, but there are only 1,000 kids in the United States that get osteosarcoma, but there are 20,000 globally. And, we started this company for unmet medical need. And so we want to make sure that we're partnering with someone who can get to the patients around the world with this disease.
Paul, when you mention the people that do the research, I'm thinking chicken and egg. Is this something that you start your company and you say, we want to be in this field and do this? What kind of cool research is out there? And then maybe what can we buy from these, schools? Is it that? It's not you going out and saying you're hiring some college to invent this stuff. Got a guest you'd like to hear on the show? Let us know at bizoffarmpod.com.
I think it was all a lot of serendipity, Mike. We started this company. I had been in the pharma industry all my career. Johnson & Johnson, Amgen, Boehringer Ingelheim, and I had tried to start a couple companies with some friends and coworkers from some of my former companies, in licensing technology from big pharma that wasn't big enough for them to commercialize. And there have been some very successful companies that have done that, Valiant and some others. But it was actually a personal experience when my daughter's best friend was diagnosed with osteosarcoma. And she's doing great. Unfortunately, about half the kids pass away from osteosarcoma. And so we started as a nonprofit. We started a nonprofit. We're shaving our heads. I've shaved my head 3 times. I'm probably going to do it again this summer to raise money for pediatric cancer. It comes back thicker and darker if you ever get a chance to shave your head. It's an awesome opportunity. We've raised at least $3, if not more, $1 million raising that, shaving our heads. But then I read that the University of Pennsylvania, this technology was being given up by another company called Vaxxus. It was a phase 2B osteosarcoma asset. And I knew why they were giving it up. It was because there were only 1,000 patients. And if this is the business of pharmacy, 1,000 patients isn't a lot, right? It's ultra orphan. And we've built a pretty good business model around it. We also added all these other indications. We added this other technology, but we could be a $500, $700 million company with 1,000 to 1,500 patients that are in the United States, especially if we're keeping them alive. So that patient population grows, which 2 benefits of that. One, they're living longer, but it also gives us the opportunity to expand the market. So we in-licensed technology. We started the company and started the clinical trial on October 21st, 2021, and finished the trial less than 3 years later, a year ahead of schedule.
What has to go right for this to come out within a year, and what could go wrong that it doesn't come out within a year, or dare I say never?
So this is the business of pharmacy, right?
Yeah, right.
Everyone knows that drug development stuff's not easy. There are 1,000 places where this could have gone wrong and a few key places where this could go wrong moving forward, but I think we've addressed a lot of those. We just recently announced that the FDA has granted us a meeting to review our analysis of our data. As soon as we get that feedback from the FDA, we will submit the data. We have a couple meetings with the FDA. We're also meeting with the UK equivalent, MHRA, and eventually sometime this year with the European equivalent, the EMA, and we'll apply to get commercialization of the product, OST-HER2, in recurrent resected osteosarcoma. It'd be the first new treatment in over 40 years. Really cool thing, there's a program called Priority Review Voucher, and this is probably one of the bigger things going on right now in the pharma world. There's a movement that should occur to reauthorize this legislation, but it hasn't occurred yet. We always talk about unintended consequences of legislation. Well, this actually meets the intended consequences of legislation. It encourages companies like ours to do more research in pediatric and rare diseases. And it also benefits big pharma because they can get their products to market faster. What the priority review voucher is if we get approved for a rare pediatric disease, we get a transferable voucher that we can sell on the secondary market. The last one sold for about $150 million. And what a big pharma can do, if they've got a $1 billion product coming to market, they can cut in line. I call it the global access or clear of the FDA. And they cut 4 months in line instead of 9 months. They can get approval in 5 months. They get to market sooner, maybe first. They get starting to growing their forecasts 5 months sooner. And they have 4 months more data exclusivity on the end. So they have 4 more months of the marketing that they wouldn't have had otherwise.
So let me see if I got this. So the government, if there's success in your company, the government gives this to you, and then on the market, you can say, who wants this? And a company's going to say, hey, it's worth $150 million for us to speed whatever we want sped up, and we're going to pay that then to your company. And that gives everybody incentive. It gives you guys incentive, gives them incentive. It keeps everything kind of rolling.
Correct.
Paul, have there always been companies like yours around, or has the internet allowed more of that? I mean, a smaller company doing this, I got to think that, the web, which is, old for anybody listening to this except old farts like me, but,
And me.
Yeah, well, I didn't want to say it. Because you got the dark hair. I'm the gray-headed one over here.
Because I shaved my head 3 times.
Yeah, I know it. I know it. My wife would kill me. I came down, she recommended a goatee, 5 or 6 years ago, and we have a bunch of kids, and you don't sit around too often and just say how handsome your husband is. It just doesn't happen in the day-to-day talk around the house. But I came down about a year later after I had grown it, I had shaved it. She looks over at me and says, why'd you do that? And to me, that was like, you are a handsome devil with that goatee. I mean, that's what that meant. So no shaving for me. So back on that question, would you see this 10 years ago, a company like your size, 20 years ago? What has made these pop up, or have they always had these sizes?
There have always been innovations, certainly coming out of the university systems. Moving forward, the lack of funding that may be occurring on a federal level may affect that. But, both our technologies came out of NIH-supported facilities, UPenn, Scripps, but they have to be commercialized. Big pharma, big bio, they actually invent in-house probably less than 10% of their pipeline. So they depend on small companies, startups, and educational institutions to develop technology. And we end up doing the de-risking of the product, right? So we get it through clinical trial, get it approved from the FDA, get reimbursement, get a market. And then Big Pharma says, that looks like something we could put some money in. So they come in and help us expand the market or expand our reach.
Do they come in and say, we're going to buy it from you and give you a price? Or do they always bring a company like yours along for the ride and kind of do it together?
It can be either. It can be a licensing deal, and licensing deals are very common in the biotech industry. They usually include an upfront big chunk of money, and then milestones, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 milestones, and then some type of royalty. Or they can come and buy the company. I don't think we're ready right now to be bought. When we have our data and when we have some commercial success, then the possibility of buyout. But we also have multiple shots on goal, because if our technology works in osteosarcoma, which is one of the hardest cancers to beat, then we can pivot to all the other solid tumors that metastasize to your lungs and your brain. Because those little micrometastases exist in osteosarcoma that survive the chemo and radiation. They're the same HER2 looking little micrometastases that's trying to land in your lungs, if it's breast cancer or esophageal cancer or colorectal cancer, and colorectal cancer can be all over the body. So we have a lot of shots on goal with that technology. And then we also have a lot of shots on goal with that, cruise missile ADC technology I described.
Paul, talking about de-risking, does a company like yours have to de-risk? You mentioned a couple products. Now, everything goes smoothly. This comes out in less than a year. Do you always have to be, though, de-risking yourself? Do you have to have a few things on the burner? Or how do you guys deal with that kind of a situation?
Well, when we started the company, we were a pure osteosarcoma, one-hit wonder. If it worked, then the company would be successful. If it didn't work, we would be not successful. And by adding all the other indications in our licensing agreement, and then adding the canine indication, I have investors that have dogs, lots of dogs. Dogs are much more priority for some of my investors. I'd love to have it on the market when we go to the FDA so that the FDA sees that this drug is available for dogs, so it should be for kids. We'll see how that goes. The idea was that we would add these other indications, and then we added that cruise missile ADC technology. But very recently, about 2 weeks ago, we settled buying our licensor, HER2, that Listeria platform. So we own the entire platform now. And it turns out we have a pretty big investor that now owns 9.9% of us, an institutional investor, the Israeli Biotech Fund. We've got a really great investor in them who's now an owner of the company.
Talk about your investment structure and so on. I think you mentioned that you're on the stock exchange now. What does that mean in terms of when you weren't on the public stock exchange? You have just single stocks that people go on and buy. How does that all work?
Sure. So whether you're a startup biotech or any other business in the industry that you know and love and want to make a difference in, you build a business, and at some point, there are 2 reasons that companies usually IPO. We were neither of those. One is for the owners to cash out, for which we didn't. The 2 is to raise money, which we did raise some money, but it wasn't a big IPO. It's about $6.5 million. But the real reason we IPO'd on the New York Stock Exchange, American, last August 1st, was to get some recognition, some visibility for those platform technologies. And as a result, we're doing this interview with you, right? We have an investor relations firm that sets up interviews, and we've had a lot of commercialization conversations with other companies around that licensing. And sure, people can buy our stock. I would suggest you do. We hit a 52-week, even though we haven't been around for 52 weeks. We had our all-time low last week at $1.12. For reasons you can look up on filings with the SEC, it was a falsely low price because we were resetting a PIPE, which is an investment device, and the reset was last week, and it set at $1.12. That's the lowest we've ever been. And I've just shared a lot of really good information to you about where we're going. So for your listeners, I would suggest looking at OSTX as an individual stock to invest in. And as I've said all along from the beginning of this company, it's a do good, do well investment. This is my life's work, Mike. So if I can get rid of chemotherapy in one very rare, deadly cancer, life's check, right? Good. I'm done. Put me down. Don't care. But just think if we can extrapolate that out to other cancers. From an investment standpoint, you're doing really good things and you do well financially. And what I've said all along from the beginning is we can't do this without everybody helping.
I'm wondering on companies like yours, if even though it's on the stock exchange, you have a few big investors, but it's still out there trickling on some, and maybe people did it for reasons to have respect from the market or visibility and so on. Would a company like yours tend to have bigger investors because you wouldn't be able to pile up enough of the individual people?
So we did really well on our own. Before we IPO'd, we did all of this for about $20 million, $18 million, when another company would have spent $150, $250 million to do the clinical trials and get the technologies that we have.
And how many investors on that, Paul?
There were about 170. There was a time where I knew everybody on the cap table, Mike. Yeah, so 175 different investors. And, then we went public. And, for where I think you're going with this, it's for the institutional investors, the big biotech investors. They want to see our data. And they want to see our comparator data, and they know it's coming. And we've told them it's coming the last week in June. So between now and then, I foresee the stock creeping up ever so gently and very consistently. And then we're going to announce the data at a big osteosarcoma conference in Salt Lake City the last weekend in June. We think that data is going to be good. We know the data from our clinical trial is good, that there are kids responding and kids without cancer that would otherwise have it right now. And our side effects are very minimal, chills and slight fever, which means your immune system's getting fired up. And the new FDA commissioner he sounds like he really wants drugs that are safe to get out in the market and prove themselves. And that's something that would be a great opportunity for us.
I know back in the old days, the trouble that Wall Street had, that the investment firms were the same ones that were putting out the buying suggestions and so on. There wasn't enough brick walls between the advice and the people selling it. When positive stuff comes out with a company like yours, Paul, do these investors, do they have their ear right to the FDA report, or is that usually being sifted through the news or some advice thing, and then these companies are getting it from that? How much do people actually have their nose into, like, this trial happened and so let's buy now?
So on the macro level, what the FDA is going to do, everyone, in the macro world of biotech investing covers that. In the micro, if you're following us, like the 3 or 4 different analysts that follow us, and there is a very strict wall between the analysts and the bankers in the banks that cover us. We have some very respectable analysts covering us, and we appreciate it a great deal. They spent a lot of effort learning our technology. When we have news, they're right on it. That's great for our investors. It's great for our companies. But in the end, it's really great for patients, because we can't do this unless we're successful business-wise. And institutions developing all this technology, if you don't ever commercialize it, if it never gets to the patient, what good was that technology? And there's plenty of technology in the biotech world. There have been many treatments and many cures for many a disease that have died because they never got to commercialization.
Sure. Yeah, it reminds me of the people that come in the pharmacy. They're like, You're selling this for X. Some store down the street has it for 0.7X. Well, Mrs. Smith, why didn't you buy it from them? Well, they don't have it. It's not going to work unless you sell it. Those analysts, Paul, what's in it for them? Do they have subscribers or something that know they're watching it? What's in it for an analyst to follow you this closely?
Well, I mean, they have their bankers that want to see us succeed. They've been involved in our deals before, and they have investments in us. And so they want to succeed. It's important to disseminate information in a very consistent and public way.
So they're an analyst, but they might not be working just for like a magazine like I'm thinking. They're an analyst that's like hired by these banks to analyze this and then give their opinion on it.
Because those banks want the best information for them to make an investment as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. How about once the stock goes public or even before, does that involve then a board, and is a board a pain in the ass to deal with? What goes on with that? I'm imagining there had to be a board just with private investments made people want board. Where does the board get on, and when does it become the pain in the ass?
Well, I'm hoping my board members are listening to this podcast.
My dog and people at the pharmacy that want sleep medication, I suggest the podcast to. Besides that, no one's listening.
A board is very important from an oversight standpoint. And, when we were a private company, we had an awesome executive chairman that we acquired when we acquired the ADC technology, and just a real mentor, and sold his company for $4.2 billion to a Japanese pharmaceutical company, Colin Goddard, just a great guy. I've got a couple of board members that were board members when we were a private company, but when we did go public, we enhanced our board significantly with 3 really experienced, very well networked experts in the pharmaceutical industry. It just so happens all 3 of them are at least partially based in Europe. One of them's based in Geneva, Switzerland. The other splits half his time in Basel and the other half in New Jersey. Another board member splits half her time in Brussels and in Atlanta. It just so happens her son passed away in January of last year of osteosarcoma. And she's actually the associate general counsel of a big pharma company. So, her experience, not only on a personal level, which is very important to us, but on a professional level, her ability to help us with her background during her day job is very helpful, yet not conflicting with her day job at all. And the same with these other 2 board members that we've had. We had a great call today on some stuff, and they just give really good feedback.
I was going to just ask, that was my next question, thinking this through. I imagine there's different kinds of boards. There's kind of a yay-nay board. You come with all the information. They vote it up or down. There's a board that really is looking at, huge strategy. And then there's kind of maybe in the middle, it's like, we're going to do this. What's your feedback? You mentioned feedback. Would your board kind of fit into that area, would you say?
I think the boards and the leadership of the companies can be very different depending on the type of leadership that's involved in the company. If you have leadership that's, thinks they're right all the time, and look, if we're talking about pharmacists, you want a pharmacist that is right all the time, but I guarantee you the good ones ask their partners and their colleagues, what's the better approach to this? And so whether it's the most junior person on our team to the most senior person on our team, everyone's opinion is welcome. We hash out what's the best answer, and then we all move forward together. It's constant feedback on how we get to the best solutions. And I think that's true in any successful endeavor, particularly the pharmacies that I visit.
I think board stuff has changed over the years. I think back to my dad when he was on like school boards and stuff. It's like you'd have a meeting a month and you'd get the mimeographed things, mailed to you a few days ahead of time. Now some of these boards, it's like even just like a school board, it's like 24/7, people have access to emails and all that kind of stuff.
Those aren't really boards though. Those are managing boards. And, Germany and some other countries, their boards really are more managing boards. We do provide a lot of information to our board members ahead of a meeting, but that's so that we get the background, so that we can have a conversation. Boards are meant to set vision and direction. They're not meant to manage.
Would that be in general, Paul, that's the definition of the board, or is that more for your company? Like you said, some boards want to manage.
For what I envision a board versus a management team, a board, whether it's a bank, whether it's a manufacturer of whatever, you want a board that has experience and knowledge that can help the leadership set the best direction and get the best feedback and have an extended network. But you don't want them in the day-to-day because they don't have time to do that.
They don't have time, and then you're going to slow things down. If you want that, bring them on as management, but have that separation. Right. Paul, if you were not in the medical field, for whatever reason, you sell this company for $4 billion and they say, all right, Paul, but you gotta hit the road. But let's say you still have the fire in your belly, but not for cancer. Are there any other fires in your belly that could get you to lead something non-medical?
So, Mike, do you know the song by Luke Combs, If I Wasn't Doing This, What Would I Be Doing?
I'm not a country guy. I made them turn off country at work last week. They want to hear the radio, and I said no country, so I'm not a country guy.
You got to listen to the stories, man. They're not the old stories of old country that we grew up with. It's not where the dog leaves, the wife leaves, and you lose the house.
What do they call those country songs? Or like, I don't know, like Good Movies in Reverse or something like that. I forget what those are.
Right.
So that's not old time anymore, huh?
No. And, Luke Combs, who's one of the most successful musicians, he's asked, and the song is about someone asking him in an interview, what would he be doing if he wasn't doing this? He said, I'd be doing this. I just wouldn't get the recognition for it. So I always thought I would never retire. I definitely can foresee retiring now. It's just because all the work and effort that goes through.
Right.
But the passion to change things and to, again, my life's work, if we can be successful in getting rid of chemo for just one small cancer, but then what if we extrapolate that to other cancers? That is amazing. And we got a lot of work to do there. I'm not shying away from that either. But if I wasn't doing this, I'd be advocating for patients and unmet medical need just because that's how we set this company up. And that's our mission, and that's my life's mission. It always has been.
Paul, you had mentioned your pharmacy background. What were some of the places that brought you to this stage?
So I started with Johnson & Johnson, which is obviously a huge pharma company. They also had a medical surgical division. They sell a lot of orthopedic implants. I grew up in an orthopedic family. My dad, my brother, my brother-in-law are all orthopedic surgeons. I'm the failure. So I've got a huge chip on my shoulder. I want to prove them wrong.
There you go.
They're all my big brothers too, right? But I was selling orthopedic implants, and I was at Walter Reed Army Medical Center, and it was the global center for osteosarcoma. And this was 30 plus years ago. So any kid that got osteosarcoma around the world in the military would be shipped to Walter Reed. And I worked with an incredible team of physicians there, Dr. Bill Hopkinson, Dr. Tom Temple, who were really some of the first pioneers in what's called limb sparing. So when kids get this big cancer in their legs, instead of taking the whole leg off, which is a great option, amputation, people always freak out about it, but sometimes the amputation can be a great option. But these pioneers really started to put implants into these kids that were designed for adults, and they'd put small sizes in so the kids could save their limbs. And that was the early thing. That was the only part of the treatment that I saw was the surgery. I didn't see the 9 months of chemo or radiation. I didn't see the end of life. So when Olivia, my neighbor, my daughter's best friend, was diagnosed, we decided to do something about it. And actually, for your listeners, there's a really cool movie coming out on PBS next month. It's called Shelter Me, Cancer Pioneers. And it's all about our technology around osteosarcoma and another technology around another sarcoma, treating canines and then treating humans. And there are researchers and our patients, both canine, four-legged, and three-legged and two-legged patients are in this movie. And it's a really impressive, it's a whole world of what's called comparative medicine. So you compare it in animals, seeing if you can prove that it works in humans.
I think about those osteo doctors. One of my children had a pin in one of their joints years ago, and the doctor came in and said, we're going to take it out. It won't be too bad. And then can you picture like a tug of war stance, Only like 1 foot back, kind of grabbing the rope. This doc had a hold of that pin with that kind of stance, and I said, "Oh boy!" And then I think it slipped off. The force like threw him up against the back wall or something like that. I wouldn't like the bone. I told my brothers I had him on. The episode came out today, and I was just commenting how when I went to pharmacy school, some of my fellow students would say they didn't want to be a physician because they don't like the sight of blood. And I always say, you're not smart enough. If I'm in this class, I know you're not smart enough. But 2 things I wouldn't be. I know for sure I wouldn't be a dentist. You couldn't pay me to be a dentist. And the other one I think is maybe a bone doctor. I don't think I would do well with that.
I think either you have it or you don't. One of our daughters was watching an orthopedic case and had to grab a wall and slide to the ground. The other, they had to keep her from jumping into the surgical field.
So, Paul, what does your week look like as the CEO of this?
A lot of what I do is advocacy for the disease, osteosarcoma, advocacy for making sure that rare and pediatric diseases get the attention from a regulatory standpoint. I'm managing a really passionate team. There's no one on my team that's less passionate about this than I am. We all are very focused on making sure that patients get a new treatment for this really rare and really deadly disease, dealing with bankers, dealing with investors, dealing with the market. And the market's been tough, but we actually have had a great few days, and I think that's going to continue.
Besides that voucher,
the priority review voucher,
besides that, are there other incentives for a company? Like when you're only making something for 1,000 patients, and I know each one's important, but when you're in the market, when you're making it for 1,000 patients, is there other funding that makes it worth it for a company to do that? Or is the priority review voucher the big one?
Well, obviously getting the product to market and selling the product at market. And the markets around the world are not as lucrative as the U.S. market, but European market's 70% of what the U.S. market is, and it's a bigger market.
Just selling it on the open market, you get reimbursed. It's not like you're looking for grants all the time. I mean, you're pricing it right to get a reimbursement and so on, or to get profit and
Correct.
so on.
And it's not, it's not a bank buster. So we don't foresee a real challenge in getting reimbursement because it's not a lot of patients. It will probably be expensive compared to most things. We don't know what that price will be, but it will probably be expensive. But if you're going to treat at most 1,500 patients, that's not like treating 300,000 patients or how many ever patients are on GLP-1s right now.
Paul, a listener has half a minute when they pull up in their car. What could they do? Can they look up your symbol?
Just look up OSTX, OS Therapies on the New York Stock Exchange, OSTX.
Well, golly, Paul, thanks for your time. The business part is fascinating to talk about. So thanks for a good vision of that. Very cool.
Great. Thank you very much, Mike. It's my pleasure.
You've been listening to the Business of Pharmacy podcast with me, your host, Mike Kelzer. Please subscribe for all future episodes.